This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. And for those of you who are listening for the first time, avoiding the maze is just really getting through life. Um, we walk, start walking when we're toddlers, and we bump into things. And sometimes our parents and our siblings move those things around so we don't have all those obstacles in life. But you know what? They can't stay with us forever. And so we continue to find obstacles that we have to bump into, go around. And this is where we share that information so that we can live a little safer life because I'm tired of bumping into things. So today, my guest is Virginia Jones, and I'm have not officially met Virginia yet, other than just a few minutes ago to say hello. But we are both on a group called podmatch.com. And I'm so excited with this group. A big shout out to the founders of it because we all have a message. And for many of us, we've been walking around most of our life with this message in us saying, how do I share it? What do I do? And many of us have become podcasters like Virginia and myself. So, Virginia, welcome to Avoid the Maze. And your bio tells me a little bit about your personal life, but doesn't really tell me, like, why did you two decide to podcast?
Well, thank you for having me on. Um, I have to go back quite a few years. I'm a veteran homeschooler. So I homeschooled both of my daughters, which are now 30, and my youngest just turned 24 today. Um, so I guess homeschooling became my identity. And sometimes when you go through life, you pick up all these different hats, I guess, that you wear.
Right.
So I had several identities, I guess, if you want to call it that. I'm a pastor's wife. I was a homeschooler. I was a Sunday school teacher, and I was doing all these things. Well, my husband and I ended up feeling led of the Lord to come home. And so that's what we're doing now. We home church. So I was doing all those things. And then when homeschooling got done, there was a huge void. It's like, what do I do with myself?
Right.
And I started a YouTube channel. I did that for a few years. It had its ups and downs. But where I live in a rural community, it's extremely hard to upload things. It takes forever to upload a video.
Right.
Um, and then my oldest daughter got into photography, and I've always loved photography, but I like black and white photography. So I started thinking, well, okay, well, maybe I'll get into that. So I started doing that, and I'm on my way to building a business with it. So I call myself Girl in Gray Photography. And then I was listening to a podcast one day, and I'm trying to remember the name of the podcast. I can't remember exactly. And they had an advertisement for Anchor. And I got listening to that. And I'm like, that might be interesting. I think I would really enjoy that. So I started it last September. So I've been doing it a little over a year now. And I really enjoyed it. So I at first I started on my iPhone. That's where I started my podcasting. And then I invested in a mic, and I invested in a desktop computer and all that. I'm still investing and still changing things. I started out with the name Country Number 2 Heart, because we live in the country, and I'm a country girl at heart. I've lived in the city, but and it just didn't seem to fit what I like to do or who I am. So then I changed it to a vintage lady. So that's what the title is now. I love historical clothing. I love vintage things. and that just seemed to do better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, but I love it. I really do love podcasting, and I've struggled a little bit where everybody does, trying to find their niche and trying to figure out what to do. And I'm not tech savvy at all. So I've had to learn by experience, but that's really the fun of it, I think. So,
Absolutely. And I've been doing this um wow, almost 10 years. Didn't
oh
even realize it
wow.
was that long. Um New Cleveland Radio, we developed it 4 years ago, and
Oh
initially
wow. Okay.
it was developed because my son um is a sports guy,
Oh,
and
okay.
his background was in media, and he just wanted to get out there and talk sports and talk about it different than everybody
Hmm.
else. And so I said, you know what, let's create the station. You can do the sports, I'll do everything else. And he did it for about a year, but then he went to work for a major baseball team here in Cleveland.
Oh
So
wow.
legally, he can't even talk baseball anymore.
Oh
Um,
wow. Oh.
so occasionally he gets on, he'll talk, general sports. But it was at that time I said, you know what? I know what I've always wanted to do.
Hmm.
And what I've always wanted to do is share with people, basically like you are,
Hmm.
about, you know, I didn't have a great day today because I had that flat tire. And that flat tire, what did it do to
Hmm.
me? And how could I have reacted differently?
Right.
And, most people in the beginning said, nobody's going to listen to that. And I said, but they are, because we have daily obstacles in front of us.
Right. Right.
And I also thought about individuals like yourself, that whether you did homeschooling or you were a stay-at-home mom and now
Hmm.
your kids, move out. How do we adjust? Okay.
Right.
Because there's always somebody who's saying, oh, you're so lucky your kids moved out, or you're so lucky you don't have to do that anymore. And maybe you are, but if you don't have another identity
Right.
in your head,
Right.
you're thinking, I'm all by myself, on this
Right.
desert
Yeah.
island. And so that's how we began. And
Okay.
we have a network of individuals who podcast through us. And when I was on Podmatch and I was reading about Vintage Lady, I thought, well, I wonder what this is really about, because vintage has become a big topic
Hmm.
recently, and especially during the pandemic. So, can you
Right.
tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about, you know, how you see that?
Um, I've always loved history, and I know some people look at the word vintage and they think, the 60s, the 70s, 40s, whatever. I kind of look at it that way, but I also look at the way things were done. So, an example, my husband and I are trying to build a homestead, and I want to be able to do things as in a way the homesteaders used to do them.
Sure.
So I kind of look at it like that. I love the Regency era, so I make historical clothing.
Yeah, I see a dress behind you. Yes.
Yeah. And so right now I'm working on a 1870s outfit. I also got some other patterns I'm going to be working on. So I kind of like to look at everything as how did they used to do things? And that's really what a vintage lady is in perspective, I guess.
Mhm.
But I also approach today's topics too, and then try to put the history, kind of correlate them with how it was done in history. So,
Absolutely.
trying to think of an example. Um, like I did an episode on the Little House on the Prairie series and how the critical race theory, they were trying to shut her books down. They're trying to unpublish them.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, I wanted to tie that in. What were the reasons that she made the quote she did about Indians or Black people, and you have to understand the history, the time that she lived in. So I try to bring things like that into my podcast. I hope that makes sense.
No, and it does. And I think that's so important because I was having a conversation on the weekend. I work as an IT rep, and I was having a conversation with a young man who probably he's still in high school, so he's probably 17 years old. And every other word out of his mouth was a 4-letter word here at, at
Yeah.
work. And I'm thinking to myself, when I was that age, I never would have done that.
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't have done it around an adult, and I
Mhm.
wouldn't have done it at all. But yet today, that is extremely common,
Right. Yeah.
and
Unfortunately.
nobody calls anybody out. Okay,
Right. Right.
and I didn't want to call him out, but I did ask the question. You
Mhm.
know, is there a reason why
Right.
every other word? And he looked at me and he goes, "Did I offend you?" Which I thought was very nice of him to at
Mhm.
least ask. And I said, "No." And he said, "Karen, you have to know this is a different time and age." And I said, "I understand that." I said,
Right.
"But I don't know when this became acceptable." And he said, "I don't know, but I've been brought up with it." And he said, "That's how
Wow.
my family talks."
Wow.
And I thought, okay, that's his
Mhm.
culture.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not for me to change it, but I had to understand where it was coming
Mhm.
from. And so I think you make a great point in your podcast that, maybe certain words or um, expressions had been used
Mhm.
and we didn't think of them as degrading at one time.
Right.
And
Right.
today, we look back and we go, well, that's not a really nice thing to say. How do we
Right. Yeah.
change that?
Right. And I think that's the really key is being an example. Um, yeah, we didn't like the Tom Sawyer books or Huckleberry Finn, there were words in there that if said today would be really offensive.
Right.
You have to understand the time they lived in, but we can change that by being an example. So just like
Exactly.
that young man, if you were working with him and you're not going to go around saying those kind of
Right.
words. And over time, you may change his way of doing things by your example. So,
Yeah. And,
kind
and
of
he,
try to do that.
and he actually said something like that. He said, well, maybe you can keep me in check. And I said, well, I'll do the best I can. I'm not here
Yeah.
to be your mom, but I felt that I just had to ask
Hmm.
um, because I didn't want to come across as um, not accepting of him.
Hmm.
Because
Right.
again, I know
Right.
this is a very natural thing,
Hmm.
for that age. So in your podcast, and you mentioned Anchor, and so for those who are listening, Anchor is an app which anybody can get. There's no charge for it.
Right.
Um, and I recommend to people that if you've got this deep down feeling inside of you that you have something to share, um, blogging and podcasting
Hmm.
is the best way to get your words out.
Right.
Um, and you don't have to be a professional when you start because none of us
No.
were.
No.
Um, in fact, I've even heard some radio hosts say that they have a difficult time podcasting, whereas being on the radio,
Oh,
everything
that's
was
too
written out
funny.
for
Wow.
them. Um, but it's an interesting road because there are so many of us,
Mhm.
but yet at the same time, we're not stepping on each other's toes because
Right.
it's all about
Right.
our experience.
Hmm. Right. Well, that's one thing I wanted to try to do is be unique. And I do take some ideas from people and I learn from other podcasters, but I still want to try to be myself. I don't know. And sometimes that's hard because like I did an episode on like tomatoes and the history of it. So I try to
Okay.
throw a little bit of history into my topics.
Sure.
And I'm thinking to myself, who in the world is gonna want to know about tomatoes?
You
But as I studied for it, I found it interesting, and they actually consider tomatoes to be very poisonous. But the reason was because and I can't remember the name of the metal now. Uh they maybe it was tin plates, right? They used to use metal plates when they would eat and stuff. So
okay.
the acid in the tomatoes had a chemical reaction, and they began to think that tomatoes were poisonous. And it was through a gentleman doing different things with them that he was able to finally prove that no, they're not poisonous. They just have a lot of acid in them. But yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah. But sometimes, you try to do topics, and I was trying to brainstorm about a week ago, trying to get some topics ahead. And I was drawing a blank. It's like, what do I talk about sometimes? But, you kind of get stonewalled, and then, you get your second wind and
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Well, and that's, when we started New Cleveland Radio, like I said, it was for sports for my son and for
Mhm,
me to bring in people to talk about things that they were passionate about.
mhm.
Um, and I will tell you that first year it was tough because
Right,
I
yeah.
reached out to people that I thought you're so vibrant and you've got
Mhm,
this, and then they would come on and week after week they talked. It basically was the same thing, and
mm,
then I had to learn as the producer to say, you know what, this is working and it's not working. Come up with
right,
ideas for some people, and it's it's different when you are enthusiastic about what you're doing, and I can see that
right.
you are, okay? Yes, it may be sometimes a chore. What am I gonna talk about? But then
Yeah.
but once you get it, it's
Right.
like, you know, I mean, the history of tomatoes, I never even thought about the history of a vegetable, but that could just be like interesting to figure
Yeah.
out when was the first tomato grown?
Right, right.
So you mentioned photography. So let's talk about that because um, my husband had a chance when he was very, very young to spend a session around Ansel Adams. So I understand the black and white photography and all that. But what drew you into photography?
Um, well, actually, the one thing that started drawing me was my oldest daughter, and she has a real passion for it. And both of my daughters are very artistic. My oldest is through photography. My youngest, she does paintings. She's
Wow.
never had a lesson in her life ever, and yet it's just a natural thing for her. So being able to see things through the lens in a different perspective. And the reason why I enjoy black and white photography, when you see a picture, now this is my own opinion, but when you see a picture that's colored, it's like everything is already set for you. But when you see a black and white, it's almost as if you can step in there and add your own perspective, or
Sure.
I'm not
Absolutely.
sure if that makes sense. But so when I see a black and white photography, it's like I kind of analyze it, and try to figure out what was the photographer thinking when he took this photo. And I guess it can be done with color too, but it just seems black and white to me. It takes a deeper um thought process, maybe. I
Sure.
don't know.
Well, if any of our listeners, watched an old movie in black
Hmm.
and white, okay, I think that same perspective is there. As you're looking at it, you know, you maybe are imagining that the lead female character is wearing a red dress, but
Hmm.
I might see it as
Right.
being a green dress, okay?
Right.
And the difference in
Hmm.
color we're going to react to that character a little
Right.
bit differently.
Right. It
Uh,
sets different moods.
ex
Yeah.
exactly, and
Yeah.
so I can see that in the black and white
Mhm.
picture as well, because it could look very gloomy to somebody, or
Mhm.
it would be like, "Oh, what a beautiful sunshiny day,"
Right.
and it's like, "Where are you seeing that?"
Right.
Um, so I take it that you now are equipped with the camera and you go out taking pictures?
Yes, I do. My first camera, I actually got off of Uncle Henry's for $50. A big heavy DSLR. The one I have now is well over 700. And then I have lenses and stuff. So I slowly am building up, things that I want. But yeah, I go out, and when I take photos, I try to do it outside the box.
Okay,
So one of my photos, for example, was right in my backyard, and there was a bunch of mushrooms that were growing around my pine tree. So I got right on the ground and I got underneath the mushroom and took the picture from that angle.
interesting.
So, and that's kind of how I do things. I think, okay, what way can I get this from a different perspective? How can I kind of go outside of what everybody normally does, I guess. But so that's kind of the way I do it. But I love it. I go different places. I try to explore new areas and things like that. So yeah.
So it's interesting because as you were describing the mushrooms in the tree and everything,
Mhm.
most people probably would take that camera, would focus either on the mushrooms or, try to make it look like maybe the tree was
Mhm.
further away from the mushrooms than it is. But I
Yeah.
love the fact that you went underneath the mushrooms, um, because now you're like, you know, an insect on the ground. What are you
Right.
seeing?
Right. And
Interesting.
there's different worlds that we can see at different angles. So yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you talk about a homestead. What describe to our listeners what a homestead is for you and your husband?
um I'm not sure the way other people describe it.
Okay.
So, and so I kind of am insecure sometimes in that, because a lot of people they have homesteads and you look at them and you think, oh man, they got it all together, or they know what they're doing.
Uh,
For us, I would say creating a place of simplicity and being able to grow our own food sources. So at the end of the day, you really feel like you've been productive in providing
right.
for myself and my family. So for us right now, we've started with chickens. We have three hens and a rooster, and we have a garden that we've put quite a bit of work into. Next spring, we hope to get some goats and ducks, maybe some guinea fowl, pigs. So we're slowly building up to where we eventually will not have to rely on outside sources,
Sure.
but be able to grow our own things. And in that way, yes, it's going to be hard work, but I think it will be a simpler lifestyle. Slowing down, I think, for us really is a good way to describe, I think, our
Right.
homestead.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because um we're so used to going to the grocery store
Hmm.
and assuming that there's
Right.
gonna be apples and there's gonna be lettuce
Hmm.
and there's gonna be all these things that we
Right.
need. Um, and I've noticed just recently when I go to the grocery store, there are so many things that are not on the shelves. It's not,
Oh, absolutely.
and it's not even a
Right.
toilet paper shortage anymore. It's,
Right.
you know,
Right.
food items.
Hmm.
Um, and so creating that, um, that space
Hmm.
is going to be
Right.
something that all of us are gonna have to look at. We may not
Right.
have big yards where we can grow
Hmm.
everything that we need, but as
Right.
communities,
Hmm.
it's important. And one of the things that I got turned on to a couple years ago, my sister-in-law, she she disposes of everything in her compost, and she's got a
Mhm.
huge composting area. I happen to live in a condo,
Oh,
so I have a little patio, and I
mhm.
don't really have a composting area, but I compost what I can. So coffee
Right.
grounds, tea grounds.
Mhm.
I'll tell you, I have the most beautiful plants of all my
Mhm.
neighbors. Um, and talk about at the end of the day how good you feel.
Right.
One less
Right.
thing that went into a landfill. Um,
Right.
and I do know some of the animals around here are eating those grounds, but
Mhm.
you know what? They're natural, so I'm not hurting them.
Right.
Um, so I love what you're trying to do, but you made a comment that other people, may have better or perfect. So I just completed a podcast before this, and one of the things we talked about is there is no perfection.
Right. And
Okay.
I know that. It's just sometimes I get insecure. Like when I started photography, I've never had a class. I do a lot of things just by simply experiencing them and hands-on. And when I was homeschooling, if I could go back and homeschool again, um, I would step away from the textbook and be more hands-on learning. And we did do some of that. Um, but I would definitely want to do more of that. And one of the things that you stated was in talking about the homestead was having a community. And that's the other thing. When we see shortages in the grocery stores, and I actually want to do an episode on this, so I have to do a lot of research. But I've watched several videos where the government is actually causing shortages.
Right.
They are paying farmers to destroy crops. And when you go back to homesteading, you can grow things that someone else might not be able to grow. So you can barter. And
Right.
I think that's going to be something that's going to come into play again. Now, you mentioned that you live in a condo, but even there, you can grow things as you've
Right.
already stated.
Right.
And even if you live in the country on an acre of land, you can do a lot with an acre of land. We have a little less than 6 acres. So I'm able to do a little bit more than somebody else. So if I can provide something that you might not have, you can provide something that I might not be able to grow. And so I think that's going to build communities
Well,
again.
and I certainly hope so. And we do have a community garden
Hmm.
here. Um, in fact, one day somebody was saying to me, well, if you want to bring your compost over, you can. And I said, no, I'm just going to keep it from my plants right now. Maybe next year.
Right.
Um, but it has brought this condo subdivision. We have, I think, about a little over 7,000 living, because this
Oh,
was a
wow.
huge farm at one point.
Hmm.
Um, and it has brought people together that normally, they would go to work, come home,
Right.
go
Right.
inside. Maybe they'd say hi to their next door neighbor.
Hmm.
Um, but in the last year and a half, especially with COVID and everything,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
brought us all together.
Right.
Um, and, I think that's what we need. We need more
Right.
simplicity. Um,
Absolutely.
so, and when you mentioned, getting the equipment that you needed to do the podcast, again, for those listening, a podcast can be done with a lot of equipment and it
Hmm.
can be done with very little equipment.
Right.
And the biggest thing really is the internet, getting the word
Hmm.
out. So,
Right.
I'm sure you had to learn the hard way of possibly cranking up the internet somehow.
Yeah.
So, if you had one final word to give the listeners about, you know, what you're doing, what would it be?
Oh, wow. Oh, goodness. Just sharing my experiences and trying to be an inspiration to people. I try to come across as encouraging, and that no matter how small or how large your dreams are, never give up, because your dreams are worth fighting for. And yes, you may face obstacles. My husband and I right now, I mean, we're facing a lot of obstacles because of his health. We've had a lot of gut issues, and I deal with migraines from time to time. And thankfully I haven't had any lately, but no matter what your obstacle, there's always a way to overcome them. There's always a way, don't give up on your dreams. So I guess that would be it.
And I love that because, you know, sometimes when um, we dream so big that we're afraid to even share it with anybody.
Right.
And one of the things my father taught me was when you dream, no, you have to take baby steps.
Right.
So
Right.
as you take
Mhm.
those steps, you have to, you have to rejoice in it.
Right.
I took that step.
Right.
And it was like when I started, composting, it was
Mhm.
like, okay, I can't do what my sister-in-law does because I don't have that same kind of setup,
Right.
but I can do
Right.
this.
Right.
And last winter was the first winter that I even carried it out. I would walk out in the ice and snow and put my stuff out. And, it was like, hey, I can do this,
Right.
like
Right.
I don't know why I didn't do it the last
Mhm.
2 years. So
Right.
praise yourself for those good
Mhm.
things.
Right.
And I agree with you. Don't give up on your dreams because
Right.
dreams are what make us really, really happy.
Mhm. Yep.
Well, I'm so glad you joined us today, Virginia. Tell everybody again what your podcast is so they can find it.
Okay, it's a vintage lady vintage lady. So they can find me on Spotify, I guess Anchor, if you look for it on Anchor. But yeah, but thank you so much for having me
Oh,
on your show today.
absolutely. I certainly appreciate you joining us, and we will continue to follow you, and we'll have you back on again in the future, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day now.
Yes, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.